All of you to the first policy meeting of the 2019-2020 school year here at our D65 Policy Committee meeting. I am Sergio Hernandez. I am the chair of the Policy Committee meeting. I want to welcome all of you, all of our stakeholders, educators, to this table. This table is always a place that you're welcome to. Again, part of board governance is to create policies, but also ensure that we're listening to all stakeholders as we create these policies, and making sure that your voice is included as we deliberate over these policies. So with that being said, I don't know if you want to take the attendance.
Yes. Hernandez.
Here.
Lindsay Ryan. Here. Mendoza.
Here.
Okay. Just want to let you know we will allow for public comments after each discussion item. Each speaker will have 2 minutes. The Policy Committee will not permit the voicing of personal attacks against any district employees. Speakers are discouraged from using the public comment period to air specific concerns about staff members, being mindful that the public comment period is not a suitable forum for fact-finding or resolution of disputes. Rather, we encourage members of the public who have concerns about specific district employees to follow district communication guidelines on the student handbook. Please remember to state your name and that you have 2 minutes to address the Policy Committee. So then, if there are no amendments to the May 2019 Policy Committee meeting minutes, I recommend that they be presented to the full board for approval.
Second.
Lindsay Ryan.
Yes.
Mendoza.
Yes.
Hernandez.
Yes. Okay, so with the approval of minutes, now we move on to our discussion items. We're going to first start off with our gender equity policy and procedures. You want to start us off, Bill?
I'll be happy to do that very much. Board, you have in your packet the policy revisions that are being proposed. That would be 5.10 and 5.20. And you see those have been done by legal counsel, by Nikki Blazer, who's a specialist in that area. And as you look through there, you will see the changes that have been made or identified in red, so you can see exactly what those are with that as well. And the changes to the policy are to reflect the legal obligation and the commitment that the district has to protecting the rights of transgender and gender expansive employees. And so the purpose of this is to codify this commitment that you see in front of you on that as well. We would like to open up any discussion that you might have, board, on those changes that were made by that attorney as well, and would be happy to answer any concerns or questions that you might have.
Thank you for that, Phil. Thanks for the intro on this. So any discussion on this, these proposed changes to the policy? So it's policy 510, which is the Equal Employment Opportunity Minority Recruitment Policy, where we add, on top of race, color, creed, religion, national origin, sex, sexual orientation, we add the line gender or gender identity, whether or not traditionally associated with the person's designated sex at birth, gender-related identity, or expression. There was also a change made in 520, is that right? With the same wording, for workplace harassment, which is prohibited. Yes.
Question. I don't have any questions about that verbiage or policy changes. My question is really towards the administrative implementation component and the language around that. And if you could just speak to a little bit the process for developing the procedures and who would be involved in terms of input before, and then who would be involved in terms of feedback potentially, so we can understand that.
That's a great question with that. Could we put up on the slide here is just a proposal of that. Biz, you can speak at it very specifically with that, but we've tried to do is put together some type of a procedure that's going to enable us to carry out these policies with fidelity. And Biz, would you mind walking through
Sure.
both the timeline and the purpose of that would be great.
Yeah, and can you make sure you're speaking into the microphone?
Sure.
Maybe. So the first thing I'd like to say is I'm really excited that we had Nikki Baser join our team in discussing this. For those of you that don't know, Nikki is a state-recognized advocate on transgender issues, has been involved as a pro bono effort in her legal career of working with school districts and across the state, and serves on statewide committees serving the transgender community. So having her perspective from our legal team at Franzik is great. So Nikki and I kind of went through and tried to figure out how do we meet the urgency and make sure that we're moving things as quickly as possible, but not at the cost of making sure that we roll this out effectively. And so our recommendations are that we would start with, if the language, after our discussion of language today, that we would vote to approve that language at our next board meeting. I don't see any reason why we can't move forward with the policy. We don't need to wait for that to get the procedures going. And that our goal would be then to secure a consultant with ideally personal and professional experience and understanding the experience of transgender folks, to work with Nikki to work on drafting the procedures. We think that they need about from November, so having that person secured by November 1st, with the first draft of procedures between the two of them being by December 2nd, and then having from December 2nd to January 13th for that to go through all the stakeholders that we need to have within the district and administrators in terms of how the application of those things would all work, coming together again on January 13th to have the final procedures approved, and then at the same time, we think we could have an implementation plan and timeline presented. We don't think we need to have all the procedures completed to be able to already create what we know is going to need to be done to roll out all of these procedures and do training and communications, et cetera. So then that would hopefully all get approved in January, with at our next policy meeting an opportunity for us to do any updates if there's any adjustments or things we need to think about. The June 5th date for completing the implementation plan rollout is somewhat dependent on what we determine is necessary as part of the implementation plan. If we decide that every building needs to have a full staff meeting training, we may not be able to make that all happen by the June date, because those schedules are already determined in many of the buildings. But if we're looking at a plan for getting information out to principals and getting information out to social workers and other stakeholders, and then getting if it's a shorter plan for getting it out into each building, we think June 5th is a reasonable timeline to make sure that those things are all in place. So we want to make sure that we are not having huge delays and cushions in between, and moving things as efficiently as we can, but also want to make sure that what we create is sustainable and actually meets the needs to protect folks within our buildings. Any questions on timeline?
Candace, did that answer?
Perfectly.
I don't get perfect much, so I'll take it. Yes.
No, thank you. That's the way that I was looking to understand. The only caveat would be, you said to key stakeholders.
We'd have to identify who that is, right? I mean, I'm assuming superintendents and and various roles, principals, right? That we would need, and GSEA, DAC, right? I would want to make sure that everyone felt that we are addressing all the things that we feel like have not been addressed up to this point. So we want to make sure to consult all the key folks, both within the organization and as all the different stakeholders around LGBT issues.
Thank you for that. Any input from the community? You can always come and step up. There's 2 mics. And we also have a sign-up sheet that Adila's going to get. Let's hold just a sec for the sign-up sheet, and then I will make space for folks to give some input. So then, should I go ahead? So does anybody else want to sign up? I know, Adila, if you want to.
Sure. I don't know if everybody had a chance to see that the sign-up sheet was tucked away on the table over there, but if you'd like to sign up, please let me know. I'll walk over.
I have a question about how this works. So, before we give a public statement, can we first be a part of this conversation, or that is the public statement part?
So then what we can do is let's go through folks who signed up first, and then we'll invite a few more folks. We're giving, I know we have half an hour, for public comments. And folks are allotted at least, 3 minutes? 2 minutes?
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
Is the distinction there, is there a needed opportunity to ask questions?
Yeah.
So how does that work? It's also my first policy meeting.
Yeah, I mean, you can come in, yeah, that's part of the discussion, is to come in and ask questions as well, so.
But they would have an opportunity for 2 minutes after those questions are asked, or no?
It would be during the 2 minutes to ask those questions. So let me call our first person, it's Meg Cruden. Wanna come up?
It was more because no one had signed up. I didn't want you to be lonely.
Thanks, Meg.
So I'm glad to see this brought forward tonight. I know that you've heard a lot of it at the last board meeting, and we've seen a lot of need for it coming out, especially after this week. Candace, I appreciate you asking the question, or at least asking about stakeholder involvement. My one comment is I don't hear anything about that in what was presented tonight. And so I'm definitely looking to see where the stakeholder involvement is going to be in the part of the process. And so I do have some questions.
In addition to where it says on December 2nd, making sure it's distributed to key stakeholders for review?
Yes.
Okay, is that wanting a list of who those stakeholders are, or what's the? Okay.
And how are they determined? Who's deciding that? Absolutely.
Sure.
I really would like to hear a little bit more about this specialist at Franzik. And I think I also want to go back. There was a whole team last year that worked on a draft policy. And I'm confused about what happened to it, because they spent, my understanding is, almost a whole year. It went through vetting. It was presented, I believe, at some point to the board. So I'm a little confused about that. Wasn't even mentioned at all tonight. And that feels a little disingenuous, if I can say that word, that a committee of people and administrators worked on a draft policy, and now this feels like all of a sudden this wonderful person who sounds really like great accolades is coming in and starting from scratch. So I'm wondering if someone can
That might
describe.
be misspeaking, I don't know.
So first, to answer the first question about, I asked Nikki Baser to give me a little bit of bio that I could share so people could understand her background and expertise. So she was the general counsel of the Illinois State Board of Education and had an opportunity to work with the Illinois Safe School Alliance and support their work ensuring that transgender and gender expansive students had safe and welcoming school experiences. Together, they drafted a model school policy and guidance. And although ISB did not adopt those draft documents at the time, she was able to use that background to assist Lurie Children's Hospital in drafting its first model policy for schools, which in its current iteration remains a gold standard model policy for schools. And the procedures, the student procedures that we had, that the administration had drafted last year were based on that model policy. While still at ISB, she was also able to effectuate a change within ISB's student information system to allow districts to enter a preferred name for transgender and gender expansive students. This gave districts throughout the state the ability to electronically document a name change in the district's student information system, which in turn allowed all student documents, including enrollment, attendance, grading, etc., to reflect the preferred name. Since moving to private practice, she has counseled numerous districts on how to make their schools welcoming and safe for transgender and gender expansive students, including drafting policies and procedures that codify protections for students. She has also helped districts navigate difficult situations where parents have not been supportive of their children's transition, so that the school building remained a safe place where these students could learn and thrive. She's also committed extensive pro bono hours to assisting transgender and gender expansive adults and children get their names legally changed in Lake and the other Collier counties where there are no free legal services to provide these supports. In her private life, she served as co-chair of the legal subcommittee of a task force that brought together parents, students, lawyers, and educators to work together on the issues transgender and gender expansive students face in school buildings. She also served as co-chair of her synagogue's gender inclusion task force. Because of all this work, she was recently named as a member of the Governor's Affirming and Inclusive Schools Task Force. She's very honored to be the only school district attorney named to the task force, and is very excited to be co-chairing the task force's Policy and Procedures Working Group. So that's a little bit on her credentials. I think so. Her working in concert with another consultant who has additional experience, experience in the employment setting, I think too, and also just lived experience in the LGBTQ community to help work through the procedures will be critical. I think to your second question about the work that was done, that is definitely not being thrown out the window. I think we use policy and procedures interchangeably, and so I think the document, although it was presented as a policy document, is really more of the procedures that are being talked about and how they're going to be implemented. The documents that are in the packet for tonight are similarly to what we did with the student policy and procedures. The policy tweaks are relatively minimal just to make sure that we are including gender identity as one of the protected classes, which is similar to what we did with our student policy. And then the procedures will have the more robust, here is how we are implementing this and what will happen. So that's the document that was worked on last year, and I think that is still going to be the basis for the work going forward. It is not a matter of starting from scratch. So I think, is that right?
Them to continue their work.
Right, the work that GC has done, right, was gonna be honored. I mean, that, again,
Absolutely.
you've done the work. Now we're getting folks to fine tune it to make sure that it's sustainable, right? So again.
So to get the legal counsel and also to get the additional outside consultant to put their lens on it and also to help us figure out and I will acknowledge that we are delayed in doing that, and that's something that should have happened sooner, and I apologize for that not happening sooner, but we are trying to, that was why it was important for us to nail down dates by which we expect things to be happening so that it isn't just going to be out there in the ether again, but that we do have a plan going forward on how to roll out procedures and implement them.
I don't know how much time I have left, sorry.
Go ahead.
Thank you for solidifying the timeline. I have to say a couple things. One, I appreciate you circling back to this. It would have been really nice to have heard that you were starting with the work that was done already up front, because I will say that knowing the work that was done by the group of educators and the outside people, that wasn't how you started. And so I just need to say that it would have been nice to honor the work and start from there, saying that we're building upon it and clarifying that up front. This person sounds fabulous, great experience with students. However, I will say that what I've heard and what I know that we're asking for is on the adult side. And so just like we know that we've heard the district providing Lurie's training as this was the answer, we all know that Lurie's was really centered on students, and so it really wasn't centered on adults. So it would have been nice to have heard that we're going to be looking for a consultant as our baseline who is having an expertise and knowledge with the adult portion and our working conditions, and then we're supplementing that with someone who also brings knowledge of students and children within the field of LGBTQ+ policies. That's not what I heard, so I have to tell you, it doesn't feel like we're really honoring what the community and what we were asking for, which was addressing the issue of adults. And especially with everything that you read, which sounds phenomenal for students and children and families. This is not what we were talking about when we were asking for someone outside to support the creation of this. So that's a little concerning.
Yeah, go ahead.
And I don't know if this addresses part of this, but I think, so Nikki is not being the outside person. Nikki is the attorney for Frantic. So if we're, in my estimation, having one of the most experienced people on the Frantic team in this area, that's great to have as the district's attorney in the process. Then we need to get this outside consultant who has their personal lived experience and their professional experience focused on adults. And I apologize if I did not give as many details, honestly, in response to your starting with what you've done. That was just such an assumption in my mind I didn't even articulate. So I apologize if that wasn't clear. But I think, we recognize that there are some lenses that are that Frantic doesn't have, and we want to make sure that we have a comprehensive approach that looks at and examines all of the possible potential threats for LGBTQ plus community that have not been addressed yet.
Is Nikki at Frantic?
Yes.
Is that recent?
No, she's been there for a
I
while.
don't, I didn't.
We just brought
So I hear that, and that's great, and I know that there needs to be the thing, but so what I heard is sort of we're starting with this and we're adding on that, versus we're starting with this and we're kind of teaming them together. So you're starting with a lens from Frantic, who is starting with a lens of student-centered.
My apologies. We're starting with the work that has already been done and getting another person to make sure that they have the lens on adult and an employment perspectives and personal lens. I think there's been a disconnect between where the law is and where the humanity is, and so we're trying to make sure we're getting a team that can look at all of those dimensions. And so those folks will be working with Nikki, but it will not, it will be a partnership to make sure that all of those perspectives are heard.
Okay, I think the last thing I'll let go is sort of, I hope that since you have someone who has such an expertise within the student-centered, that one of the concerns is that we still might have a policy on students, but we do not have the procedures in place to support that. So to me, that would be a great place to use her expertise and really lean on the consultant that might be determined by the stakeholders who have some investment in this group to be able to determine what our adult policies are, and that maybe Nikki can provide some avenues of supporting our student procedures. So hopefully we'll look to hear more from that. Thank you.
Thank you. Ren Ekathorn?
All right. I'm trying to decide. I wrote a statement, but then I also have questions. Is there a preference to what happens first?
However you want.
All right, I'll continue the questions and then go into the statement. Meg hit on a bunch of them. I'm wondering, there are several of us back here who helped write and spent tireless amounts of early mornings that we could have been in our classrooms helping our students write a policy that we continued to say should be written by someone who writes policy. And so I'm wondering, when that group continued to ask, why are we doing this work? We don't know what we're doing the best we can. We need a consultant to help us do this. Why did you let us spend a whole year floundering in something we don't know how to do, for them to say, now we're gonna hire a consultant? Like, it feels insulting that it didn't seem like it mattered to us that we felt like we needed a consultant to do the work. And so you let us do it for a year for us to know that what we created wasn't going to hold up as a policy. And we kept saying, we need help. We don't know what we're doing. We need a consultant. We need a consultant. And we would get the response, we don't know how to find one. We don't know where to find one. Oh yeah, we'll find one. We don't get one. So it's upsetting to think that had we started last year with a consultant helping us, that there could already be a policy in place, and a lot of what's occurring may not have occurred. So maybe that's more of a statement. Also wondering if the group of us that helped write what we did last year, are we still involved in working with this consultant?
Yes.
Because I know that some of us are wondering what happened. We lost our administrative lead, and then it felt like it just sort of died, which sends a message potentially that it doesn't matter that much, that it didn't matter, that we knew that this administrative lead was going to be leaving, and she expressed that no one else was interested in taking that spot. So that doesn't send a very good message that this is important work if no one can step up to work with us. My other question is there consideration for specialized training for HR and principals who will be the ones who really need to be following this policy and procedures? I would hope that we wouldn't think that you can pass a policy and give them an outline of that, and that they'll know how to implement that and ensure that everyone is safe. So I guess from there, I'll read a statement that is based more on the first day of LGBTQ plus Equity Week and sort of my experience with that. I want so desperately to find out that this is all a bad dream. I want to open my eyes and find out that I work for a district that believes that LGBTQ plus lives matter, a district where the lives of queer people are celebrated and embraced. The bad news is that I am awake. This is not a dream. I am working for a district that believes that the lives of LGBTQ plus people do not belong in schools, a district where the very people hired to support this type of work do not feel an obligation or interest in coming to work to be present and supportive to those who demand this district change. Maybe you think there are people with power in this district who care about this work, but I don't believe that. Or maybe they do care, but aren't brave enough to speak up and demand what is right. I need you to be brave. LGBTQ people need you to be brave. Our lives depend on it. You made us a promise. You told us that there was a strict no opting out policy in place for LGBTQ Equity Week. You lied. You let yourself be bullied into going back on your word. What a privilege to be able to decide to be an ally one moment and to decide that being an ally feels too hard and scary. There are days I beg the universe to allow me to be cisgender, even if it's just for a day. But I don't have that privilege. I don't get to decide if I am trans or not, but you get to decide if I'm safe or not. Why would I possibly believe that even if you do create a policy to protect me, that you will keep your word and stand by it?
Thank you for the statement. And I have my apologies for personally, I want to apologize as chair of the policy committee for having let this drop, having dropped the ball on this. I wasn't told that another administrator wasn't going to take over. And again, that was news to me as recently as a couple of weeks ago. So not knowing, again, and I've been to GC meetings when you guys first started meeting, and I try to be an ally. I definitely can do better. So I'll take that onus on myself for not having followed through with administration in regards to who would have followed up as far as administration to help GC get this policy and the policy implementation put forward. So my apologies, my personal apologies to all of you. With that said, we do want to, we're taking a step forward in regards to, again, whatever policies we currently have on District 65 books, again, acknowledging your existence and acknowledging who you are as human beings, to be able to treat you with the dignity that you deserve. Again, it's a hard road, so equity isn't easy. But the beauty of it is, again, we get to hear and we get to be critical partners as we move forward with this equity work across the district. So like I said, it's not easy. But the beauty of it is that we're hearing voices that we haven't heard before. Again, I'm a testament to that, as my colleague Rebecca. Folks who have not been heard before now here at the table. And again, this table is your table, and we're happy to continue partnering with you as we develop these policies that are sustainable, and that at the end of the day, we will reach a place in this district where everybody gets treated with human dignity and gets acknowledged and is not invisible anymore.
Sergio, to the question, and maybe this is to Phil or Sydney, I understand the consultant's role, but where is the accountability sitting from us staff? Because ultimately, is it going to sit with our co-superintendents? We need a line of accountability into staff, clearly, and not just consultants. So who's going to own that? Or do we not know yet who's going to own that? Because I think everybody deserves an answer in terms of that.
Thank you. The interim superintendents would be accountable for that.
So the ultimate ownership relative to the policies and making sure we work appropriately with our stakeholders and the team that's already started.
Procedures outlined, that's correct.
I think folks need to understand that it's not going to sit with an external entity. Clearly, we need that expertise.
And that would
but
also,
the ownership sits here.
one of our roles also as interim superintendents is when the new superintendent is hired in that transition period, is to get that person up to speed what's going on, and then they would carry the baton from there, so to speak.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking specifically of the work product as it continues now.
Right.
Through,
To make sure we
the
actually
end,
meet those
to get
deadlines.
to these deadlines. That onus can't be on Nikki or any other consultant, it has to be someone here internally. And so, okay.
Any other comments or input regarding the gender equity policy and procedures?
So the person that has lived experience, that's a potential person? The idea of a person?
No, I think the outside consultant hasn't been identified yet. I think we're still working. I think Biz is going to be involved somewhat in just putting forth some people. I think we are open to getting, and I think some of them have been followed through. I think some of them finding somebody who is available within our timeline is also part of the process. So I think that's why the November 1st date is the date by which you want to identify. Maybe you want to.
Yeah, I'm not sure where those suggestions live. If it's possible to have that email directly to my board email, I will work from those suggestions. I think, our desire here is to make sure that we don't, candidly, that we have someone who's transgender identified, has significant experience in doing this work already, so that we make sure that we're not just seeing this from a perspective that might have a lot of blind spots to someone who doesn't have that identity and that experience. And so we'll have to determine kind of what, whether that, like, if you ask me, I'm like, yes, I want that person to be this and this and this, and I don't know what our pool is for that. So if you have folks that you've already recommended, I'd love that list to work from.
So as the person accountable to that, what we'll be doing is to look at that. If there are suggestions that are out there, I don't know if we have those or not. If not,
I don't know where those live right now.
I'm not sure where they are. If you could pass those along, Meg, that'd be very helpful as we work on that, so that we can live up to exactly what's been outlined here. So thanks for doing that.
I have certainly some folks from my own professional work and my own personal work in this space, but I'd love to see the list that you've all generated.
Just a question of the timeline, which I appreciate and think is really important. I guess my question would be, is there any flexibility, because this is it's October 7th, right? And we've had this list to the district for at least, for a while now. So I guess I'm wondering, is there any flexibility around the timeline, or at least the beginning dates, to be able to use some of the people that we did share, if they needed to be flexibility about getting the timing? Because to me, that's automatically potentially going to knock someone out, because the district has just come up with a timeline today when we've given names already. Does that make sense?
And this may be a disconnect with me being involved in creating this timeline and not having been previously in the
Right, so
conversation.
I guess
So
I'm wondering the flexibility in the timeline.
can I?
I guess I will just go back to saying I realize that we are behind the 8 ball on this. I think, yes, you probably did share that information. It didn't go where it needed to go and didn't get moved on in a way it needed to get moved on at the time it needed to happen. If somebody is identified before November 1st, I don't think there's any reason that there wouldn't be, moving up. I don't think there's any reason that we're going to say, well, we're going to wait until November 1st to identify somebody. But I think
the
that's kind of the
urgency
outside
is-
date.
Yeah, what I'm saying, yeah.
Urgency, I just feel that it's almost limiting. I'm concerned about the other end, Suni, so I love I'm not questioning
Do you want to just come up here again? Just
So if I'm hearing you.
what I'm feeling.
Yeah.
I'm feeling like there were names given, and that wherever they landed. So we're starting from scratch, right? But it shouldn't be impacting the group who actually gave the name in a negative way, because we're limiting ourselves to a November 1st date. So for example, if out of the group of names, someone from that list could start on November 15th, which is later than November 1st. is the
Yeah, I
board willing to be flexible so that you are honoring the names that were provided, because those names were vetted to be people that we believe have lived experience, have experience with working conditions related to adults who are challenged with this right now. So that's my question.
It certainly isn't, I don't want to speak for everybody, but it's not my desire to pick somebody randomly off the street just to meet a deadline, right? So, this timeline is aggressive intentionally to try to make sure that we have the urgency.
And we thank you for that.
But if we find ourselves in a place where we collaboratively say these aren't the right people, and as a collaboration agree that we're willing to extend the timeline to make sure we adjust for the person we think is the best person, I don't see any reason why we wouldn't be willing to do that. This is more for accountability for us, to make
And
sure
I
that we are
appreciate
not
that.
delaying the process, and not waiting weeks to go find a person like that. We can, with fidelity, try to address these things as efficiently and with as much urgency as possible, but I don't see any reason why we would not be willing to push the date back if that's what we're hearing from the community and the collaborators and stakeholders.
If that scenario happened, Meg, then what we would do is make sure that's clearly communicated that a change was made and the rationale why, because the person was out of the country or something, wherever the situation might be. So we're just very clear with people what that is. But I think that fidelity is the key. We want someone who's going to come in here and really be able to do what we've outlined to do with that.
Oh, absolutely. I think we have the same understanding with that, which is why we presented the names that we did. So I just want to be clear that who's picking the consultant? I heard you talk about sort of collaborative picking. I'm not clear that I have an understanding of who's deciding the consultant.
The administration will do that, and also with working with Nikki, working with Biz, getting the feedback that you have provided us from the group who worked last year on who those names are. We'll be taking a look at all of them.
I think it's probably safe to assume that it would be coming from the list that's already been provided, and that if it was not, there would be a conversation about why someone not on that list was being considered.
Okay, I want to make sure that we have that same understanding. Okay.
Just for our information, how many names do you recall?
I feel like 5 or 6.
Oh,
That was
okay,
like half a dozen.
quite a few names then. Okay, good.
Is there any, just because I haven't seen, is there any hierarchy to that list? Is there like a preferencing of any? Okay. I think that if there is, if you want to present that list in I'm not promising, but we'll start with looking at the people who we already are most comfortable with and most confident about.
We can do that. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments around the gender equity policy and procedures? Yes.
I just want to quickly add that, I appreciate all of your work.
Can you
Chris.
state your name, please?
I'm Ashley. I'm a 5th grade teacher. I just want everybody to reflect on the contributions that they're also making to this policy, and that this is not just business work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and with that, I just really want to take some time out to thank our GSEA group. I think your work is understated, and if at all at this meeting you feel like we're not taking that work into account, I want you to recognize that we're here because of you. So as we had these discussions last spring, you'll recall our board frustration in not being able to do for our staff what we did for our students. And I think because of the nature of board work and meetings, that couldn't be done at the time, but I really want to just express my gratitude for all of the work, because I know it's been countless hours, not just with the policy work, but with the LGBTQ plus week that we have today. So I really want to extend my gratitude for the work, the incredible amount of work. If people haven't taken the time to look at the link, the amount of care that went into preparing this week for our students is outstanding, and I just really want to thank you for doing that for our students, and thank you for bringing us to this point, because really we're here because of you. So I want to recognize your contributions, your time, and your effort and care for our school district. So I want that to be very clear, that we will continue to include them in the discussion because, again, we're here because of your work, so thank you.
Thank you. Sophie Leventhal, educator in the district. Quick question. Since you mentioned we're going to be partnering again with the gender support team, curious of one, who is taking that over, and will we receive, since we need to have a draft by November 2nd, will we receive an email about that in the next couple of weeks, or what? Who's taking that responsibility?
That'll be something we'll be taking to cabinet tomorrow morning to figure out who's going to be putting that. We didn't want to be presumptuous and do that ahead of time until we had this discussion tonight with the board, but also with all of you who have come tonight. But that's on our agenda tomorrow morning.
Okay, thank you. And I'd just like to say those of us who were on it last year are also still very interested to continue the work as well. That's good. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, and I just want to, again, reiterate, because we clearly didn't state this from the start. The work that you all did last spring is not disappearing. That is going to be the foundation upon which we continue to build the procedures. Again, you know, I just want to make sure that we're clear on the language that we're using. The policy that we're looking at is different than the procedures. And I know we're using them interchangeably, but the procedures are how it's actually going to roll out and be implemented. It's a much more robust document than what we are looking at and what we're ultimately the plan is to approve at our next full board meeting. The procedures that you all worked on are not, that is the foundation. Again, it's our bad for not moving forward on it sooner. We should have. We should have taken over in the middle of multiple transitions. The work got lost, and I apologize for that. It shouldn't have. But we are now working and trying to make ourselves accountable for that doesn't happen again. And part of that is the interims deciding who within at the cabinet level will take ownership of spearheading the work. That's having the outside consultant that you all asked for before to make sure that we are getting it right this time. That's also having Nikki Baser, who has the legal expertise, and making sure that we have that lens on it. And you know, having you all continue to be a part of the conversation as people who are living it in our district and know how we need to adapt whatever procedures for the reality of working in our district. So it was never, and it continues not to be our intention to let that work disappear.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Lindsay, a community member. I'm also a clinical psychologist and a queer woman myself. I work pretty extensively with the queer and trans community. I have a lot of vested interest in everything that's kind of unfolding here. And as I'm listening to you all talk, I'm hearing a lot of focus on policy and procedure, and I'm hoping that we're just kind of assuming that cultural change is folded into that process, right? We're talking about at the policy procedure level. I'm also hearing talk about accountability, and I'm aware, as you know, my work as a therapist has been work in the community and as a consultant. I can go around telling blue in the face and have all the perfect policy and procedure on how to be an affirming clinician and an ally and an advocate, and it doesn't make me safe, it doesn't make me affirming, right? That's for folks to decide for themselves. It's really clear that there's been a lot of relational rupture here. And as I'm listening to this conversation, I'm very struck by, it keeps coming back to, well, the outside consultant is gonna make that happen, and the outside consultant is gonna bring that, and I would like to challenge you all, particularly those of you in positions of power, to take a little bit more ownership for the cultural change that clearly desperately needs to happen. There's a lot of ruptured relationships, and it's not going to change just based on policy and procedure.
Thank you. Any other comments? Questions, concerns? Yes, ma'am.
When would be the next phase? Can you come up to the microphone?
When is the next open space for public to have comments and conversation around the change in the opt-out policy.
So then we'll be voting on the policy, to pass the policy changes on October 21st. So again, public comment would be the next opportunity to come out and talk and address that.
We're talking about the opt-out of the LGBTQ week of equity.
Can someone speak to what, I mean, I was gonna circle back to Rent, your comment earlier, because it was left hanging.
So
What policy you're referring to, so we can understand?
So we were promised that you would not, that there was no opting out of this week of equity. And principals were told, we have people here who heard the lead of this stuff promise that. And we went believing that. And to now be told and hear that you can opt out and that parents can ask for that to happen, it's horrifying in the sense that where does that stop? What else can you opt out of? So that's terrifying. It's scary to think that people in power seem to think that this is something maybe you should opt out of. So that message is there. And it worries me that that was able to be said in so many spaces with principals, to the community, at a PTA council meeting, and then I'm assuming to be bullied into changing that is concerning, because that shows that this administration can't stand by their word, that a group can get together or something and disrupt a promise that was made and communicated very clearly. So I would
Anyone speak to it?
right, I would love clarity on how that happened. I don't know if this is the space, which is what I was asking for, but today was day one, and to know that students were given a safe place out of the classroom from this work is horrendous. I mean, it is absolutely, truly appalling to know that we don't have, that we're not flying these flags on the flagpole. Like, it's truly appalling. And you all keep saying, okay, now we're gonna change, you're not. The change isn't happening. You have kids who are sitting away from a group. So where does that stop? Who is making these decisions? And how are they sleeping at night with the messages that they're sending out?
To the best of my knowledge, because I was in on those meetings, there has been no, Stacy, you can help me with this, any mandate to say now people can opt out of it.
So I know I was on the phone from 5 to 5:30 tonight explaining that there was no opt-out to a family. What I do know is that in discussions, we agreed that we would let families know what time the instruction was occurring if they were going to pick their child up, in trying to balance time and instruction if they were going to not have their child participate. The designating ahead of an opt-out space is not something that I was part of a conversation of.
So is there the ability to opt out of Black Lives Matter, out of a science curriculum that doesn't meet the religious beliefs of a family? Like, where do we?
Yeah, so what we did with this curriculum is we have stood by the curriculum. You guys did a tremendous job in developing it. It is a strong curriculum. There is nothing in there that overlaps with sexual education that would require any form of opt-out, which state law requires. And so that is actually an analogy I was using in the conversation today with the parent as I was speaking to them, is trying to help them understand how the goal of these curriculums are to elevate groups of individuals who do not have equal representation within our communities and can be harmed through historical or current habits and practices, and that these are about elevating individuals and understanding so that we can all be safe within a community. And so we are working to apply the exact same set of essentially parallels and rules for this curriculum as we would for any other curriculum. What I did hear on Friday in conversation was that when people are talking about religious objections, that it does become challenging. And so we've been helping to people to understand that this is not a religious curriculum, this is not a curriculum that is advocating any form of sex or sexuality, that this is simply a curriculum about better understanding a particular group of people and working to create safe spaces for all students where they can be accepted and truly be who they are.
I'm gonna thank you, Stacy, because I know you've been really working hard to try and help with families' understanding. I'm gonna challenge on two things. I'm gonna encourage the leadership to find another use of language. Using the word safe space implies that being in the space where it's being taught is not safe. So you've already put it out there. I would like you to revisit that. And if there is an alternative location to be used, fine. I do think Ren brings up the point of, are we now doing this for Black Lives Matter? Are we doing this for anything else? So I do think we need to bring that up. I really would like to see if the board is truly standing behind this. I really would like to see the board make a statement publicly to the community around this week and supporting it, and that actually you all are standing behind the no opt-out. Because I haven't heard anything, and maybe I missed it, so I don't want to say it, but I haven't publicly seen anything written by the board saying that you are supporting this, the curriculum, and that we are not opting it out. So I know that for the last 2 weeks have been pretty rough for the messaging that's been out there, especially for those people who are in this group. But I haven't heard anybody take a stand. Anya, I know that we were in that I heard you say something at one point about this is about supporting humanity. So let's do that. Let me hear the board say that, and let's not have to create safe spaces, right? Let's figure out how we're handling this and be thoughtful. So I'm going to ask the board to do something to show their support.
Meg, I really appreciate you bringing up the language around safe space, because that has a long history within the LGBT community about being used to create safety for our community. So the fact that it is being used as an opt-out is concerning. I think my understanding is there's no official language on opt-out, but I do think it's happening, and I'm also frustrated and concerned about that, and want to make sure that we are very clear about this being a required part of the curriculum. I know for my family, my kids, were so excited to have their experience centered for 1 week. They put their pride shirts on this morning. They were super jazzed, and the impact of watching their classmates walk out is brutal.
Yeah, I am going to share my confusion, because I think it's a little, it doesn't make sense if we're saying there's no opt-out, which is what I understood to be the case, but then we're telling people what time the curriculum is being taught so they can pull their children out, because that sounds like an opt-out to me. Or if we are providing an alternate location, that sounds like an opt-out. And so, is there clarification? Can we not do that for the rest of the week?
So I think this is a situation, one, Heidi was the individual on the call on Friday, and so we do need to probably have a larger conversation, because I think there is context. So I honestly, I stand by the no opt-out. It is not district policy to be creating a space in advance of you can be in the school and you cannot be part of the learning. Our stance was all members of the school are part of the learning. If a family says that they are refusing to have their child as part of that learning, we are not providing that safe space within the building and providing any form of alternative education. I do think that for some families, we have situations where kids are going to be out for the week. And that's where families are making those decisions, or they're trying to remove for a window of time. I stand by the fact that all students should be part of this learning. I do.
I agree, and I appreciate that, and I appreciate, and I think maybe it's worth clarification to our school leaders that there is no obligation to provide an alternative space for students. I do recognize that there are going to be parents who pull their kids out for the entire week, and there's not a whole lot we can do about that. Maybe we need to consider some parent education as well as part of this learning. I will just, though, reiterate, if there is not a legal reason for us to have to provide the specific times of any curriculum, and I think this goes for this week, it goes for Black Lives Matter in School Week, it goes for any other week that we're going to have to address the experiences of marginalized peoples, that if there's not a legal reason that we have to provide that information, I think I think it's part of the day, and it's woven throughout the day, and that's how the curriculum works.
Yeah, if we can use this experience to move us to a place where it's not one touch point during the day, it's an experience
Yeah,
that happens all day
absolutely.
long, all
Right.
year long, then it's a lot easier, a lot harder to opt out.
Why limit it to a week? Why limit Black Lives Matter? Why limit LGBTQ plus to a week? Why don't we weave it in throughout our social studies curriculum, so then that way everybody's represented throughout the year? I mean, I think, I get that we need to,
It's a starting point, but it's not.
it's a
where we
starting
should
point,
end
but
up.
it's not the place that we.
And Sergio, that is the long-term intent,
Absolutely.
is ultimately to use this and to use the individuals who've committed their time and to partner with, I apologize for the verb, to partner with the individuals who have invested deeply in these weeks to find ways not only to integrate it in social studies, but integrate it in literacy. And there are many instances where educators use very powerful books to communicate many of these ideas throughout the year. And so it is about how to elevate it up and weave it throughout the instructional experience and educational experience through the day and the year, about marginalized people as a whole. We're working hard on Indigenous peoples curriculum. We need to look at how we weave, contemporary and historical around Latinx, Black, Indigenous, and LGBTQ.
Well, the beauty, again, I got to look over the curriculum that's being taught. So the beauty is that it weaves in Black and Brown, LGBTQ plus folks who have been just, phenomenal history makers. So again, the notion of intersectionality that we talk about in racial equity work is perfectly woven. And who from better? I still got my teacher license. I'm so proud of teachers, my fellow teachers who are out there. Again, when you give folks the chance to plan together and to work together to get something done, they get it done. And it's just a really incredible curriculum that I'm excited that my kiddos are learning about. So. And again, I'm sure, and I've seen, again, pieces and instances throughout in the middle school that my kids go to around, Latino and Black history that's starting to be incorporated. It's not there where we want it to be. There's still a lot more to teach, but there's a starting point that we need to be at first, right? And eventually it'll be woven, and it'll just be something that is the nature of our district in regards to honoring people who have not been, who've been made invisible, right? So.
I think it's also important to know that this isn't the first time these discussions have ever happened in our schools. And for those parents that just think that it is the first time, I was talking to my 8th grader today, and I asked her about her lesson, and she said it was very similar to the lesson that she had last year on identity and had been talking about for many years. So this is an important build on that. It is not the first time, and so folks should talk to their kids about what they've been learning in our schools all along.
And look at the curriculum that's out there, because it really is a wonderful and thoughtful and age-appropriate curriculum. And I worry that some of the people who are opting their kids out haven't even actually looked at it.
I don't think I'm speaking out of turn.
I was going to circle back to Meg. I do think we should put out the board should put out a statement of support, because, this is a change effort, and part of that change is showing our leadership and our support, and that will help folks in the buildings as they get pushed back as well, or as conversations happen, to realize that this is a cultural shift and an important shift that we need to make as a school district. So, any help that we can provide on that. Sorry.
No, you're okay. I was just gonna say, I don't think I'm speaking out of turn to say you all did such a stellar job creating the curriculum that you've made everybody's jobs easier, that we can just focus on all the things that are not really about the curriculum, because the curriculum is so good. You really just did, I don't think any of us have a hard time defending what an excellent curriculum you provided. The other stuff we have to deal with because it's the other stuff, but I think all of us feel like we can stand behind the curriculum with no reservations, so thank you for that.
So can I just circle back to, I'm not sure that I'm clear on what was decided about the rest of the week. And so, once that's decided, I'll step away from the table now, but I am going to ask whatever you all decide as a board and administration, that that message go out tonight, because I think that there is some lack of clarity. I would encourage the change in language to go out tonight, and that we not wait until the morning. And so I'll walk away now. I don't know if you have anything else, but I'm gonna, I do agree that if we're offering these options, that we really are basically letting people opt out. And so I would encourage you to stand firm, and that we continue to do this, because this will come back around. In a little while, it already is with Black Lives Matter. So let's stand strong and, really try to make a difference. And we know that it's important not for only each other, but for the students that are in front of us.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to get clarity, is not telling folks the time of the lesson an option? I asked if not telling folks the time of the lesson each day is an option.
Stacy and I have the disadvantage that we were in the conversation with the principals, but as I understand it, the times were not advertised. It was a matter of if a parent were to ask an administrator, when will this lesson be taught, that the administrator would tell them the truth of what the time would be that it would be taught. That's my understanding of it. Stacy, I know you were also not in the conversation, but is that your understanding as well?
Yeah, and so my understanding was that part of the test or check was if we had asked when we taught reading or when we taught math, we would say what time we taught reading or we taught math. So if you move to not saying when something was taught, then it felt as if something was being hidden or withheld. Again, I'm sharing what my understanding was as part of the conversation. I also believe that part of the conversation came up around religious objections.
There is, though, at least one principal who had all of their staff list for the week, all the times that this is happening, without a parent asking for that.
Okay. I did not know that.
And then is that an unexcused absence then, if the student is pulled out?
I don't honestly know the answer to that. I'd have to check in with.
And the other piece is that there are students not being pulled by parents, but going to sit in the office with puzzles and things like that to do.
Yeah, that I feel like we should be able to say.
That was not supposed to be an option.
So, it's happening. Yes. I think the only other piece, looking at next year as we do this, I'm going to speak on behalf of other people, so I want them to speak up if they disagree. But I think looking at, or maybe it's more of a statement, that GSEA tried to lend their help as members, many of them members of the queer community, by putting our email out there for people to reach out to us in. I don't know that I, at least personally, can handle that again. The types of emails we received were horrifying. And so it felt like we put our email out there to be a place of support, and instead we stayed up reading emails that no one should have to read. And so we are not in a place right now as a community to subject our teachers to that. And so I think looking at next year, there needs to be a filter so that the members of the community are not the ones receiving the hate directly.
And I think we're realizing in a number of places that we need to have, whether it's a generic email address or an equity email address, but something within, because there are certainly significant aspects of the equity work that are bringing in a significant amount of criticism and pain, and we have to figure out how to deal with that.
We recently received a FOIA request on having the names of the committee with that. We did not comply with that. for the reasons you're talking.
But I will say that our names are linked to this curriculum, and there is real fear. I was with someone in this curriculum, and we didn't want to eat out this weekend in Evanston because we are truly fearful. And so I need that to sit with all of you, that yes, you didn't release those names in that FOIA request, but our names are linked to this because we're proud of this work. But we are now truly unsafe in the community that some of us live in and all of us teach in. And I don't know how else to really allow you all to sit in that. But that is a horrifying reality.
Is there anything that can be done, I know you said for next year we need to look at it, is there anything that can be done in the immediate to offer, I'm not sure what that
I
is.
think
but
it's
there's
more
anything-
that things like this opting out that's happening fuel that this is all
That's
acceptable. So I guess my last piece is if nothing else happens, please let there be a publicly accessible, gender-neutral bathroom in this building. This is a building accessed by community. This could be the first place that someone goes as they consider sending their child into this building, into this district, and there could be no bathroom for them to use. It's unexcusable.
So I'm Ashley again. Speaking to what we can do in the immediate, I think really as we plan for Black Lives Matter Week, making sure that we don't repeat our mistakes so that identities aren't continuing to be harmed. And I know that myself as a white ally am putting myself in that work, and I think that we all need to reflect on whether or not our identities are wrapped up in this, what we are contributing to fixing these problems as they come up for our Latino, Latinx community, and our Muslim community, and all religious community. I mean, like, there are so many communities that I've seen in my 1 year here that have been harmed, that we really need to be planning with foresight of protecting those people, especially if our identities aren't involved in the work, because it's safer for those people.
Thank you. I'm going to move us along. Oh, I'm sorry, one more? Okay.
So I have just two reflections on policy that I want to talk about. Yeah, Jennifer Bergner, I'm a social worker at Oakton Elementary School. When we're talking about staff protection, I can't believe that we don't already have a policy about discrimination or bullying in the workplace that protects certain groups of people. And I just want to call out, where is HR in all this? Do we really need a consultant when this is what HR does? This is what a human resources department is supposed to be well versed in, protecting your employees. And so why do we need a consultant if that's somebody's job? The second thing is, I think we have to stop making the mistake of putting things underneath people when it might be something they're interested in or passionate about. Instead, let's put something underneath the person that's part of their job description. So it's been brought up that this is not necessarily a special education issue, but it's been put under special education because the person that was interested in doing the work happened to lead special education. This is a general education issue.
So I think we have to reflect on some of these things and think about it, because if I've been working in a district for 18 years that doesn't have protections in place, if I was being harassed or bullied for whatever my identity is, that's really problematic. And I don't know why we would need a new policy in order to have that happen. So now I want to shift to talking about policies that you create and how they impact kids, because that's who we're here for, our staff who serve our kids, and then the children that we're educating. So as a school social worker, we have a gender policy in place that has what we're supposed to have access to. I have asked for the documents so I could write a gender support plan. It was never finalized. And it seemed like nobody knew that it wasn't even finalized until I made a phone call about that, which was shocking because I have colleagues that have said they've done gender support plans. So I'm wondering, where has this been done? What document have you used? Then I have asked multiple people about who's on the gender support team, because I felt like I needed to make some outreach about a particular student in my school. I couldn't be told who was on the gender support team. Now I've asked for clinical consultation with somebody at Lurie's, because the student that I'm thinking about, I think there's some clinical things that I need to get specialized help around. I haven't gotten an answer about that either. So if you want to see how your policies are rolled out into practice, this is a really, really bad example, because right now I can't do my job to meet the needs of the student that I have in my school. So what was the point of having a policy? I really hope, I know there's a lot of change that's been going on, but we need to get our acts together for these children. Not just so my job can be easier than it is right now, but so that we can keep our kids safe and so that we can do right by them. The whole reason that we're even creating these policies. So those are just some comments I wanted to make.
Thank you. As you can see, again, policy implementation is difficult. When people propose policies, they sound like great ideas, but the devil's in the details when we try to implement. So thank you for informing us in regards to again, the intention was to implement plans for children to have a place to go to, and it's upsetting. So thank you for sharing that. One more comment, and we're going to move on.
Hello, I'm Brady Prince. I'm a social worker in the district. I just have a general wondering and question. I totally understand that policy takes time and writing it and making sure it's legal and that all of our ducks are in a row. That's super important. Is there going to be any sort of support in the interim before this policy is passed for folks that are currently experiencing harassment or feeling unsafe or ways? I'm just curious if there's any way that there could be conversation about how do we support in the interim while this is being written. I don't know if you have an answer right now, but just something to think about.
Thank you. Yes, one more. Sure.
Anything like this, so I'm a little.
It's okay.
My name is Bonnie Roden, and I taught at Park School for 20 years. I taught deaf and hard of hearing kids. It was the proudest time of my teaching career. And I have a daughter who's 33 years old, who's transgendered. And a couple weeks ago, she called and said, "Mom," I won't use the exact words, she said, "What the is going on at Park School?" I said, "I don't know what's going on at Park School." And she proceeded to tell me what she had heard through the grapevine. And she said, "Wasn't Ren a pal of yours?" I used to coordinate the pals who came over from the junior high. And Ren was the kind of pal that I think it was a 6-week interim, and people would say, "Can I have her the next 6 weeks? She's so good with the kids." I'm not proud to think that I worked at Park School right now. I'm ashamed of what's going on there, and I'm ashamed of the fact that adults didn't step in and do something. That what I have heard about from my daughter in DC and what I've heard about from parents and staff is appalling. And I just felt I couldn't sit here all evening and not share with you how this feels.
Thank you. Our next item on the agenda is the SRO, or School Resource Officer, update on student de-escalation process and interim guidelines. So, if you want to tee us off there, Phil? Thank you all of you for coming out. And again, you're always welcome to a policy committee meeting, and your voice is always welcome here. Thank you. Thank you, guys.
The second item we have tonight is the topic of the update on the student de-escalation process and the interim guidelines for the roles of the SRO. And it's my understanding last spring there was a plan which was shared to convene a task force to start working on the school resource partnership. Given the need to take action as soon as possible with that, our focus has moved to developing a procedure to work with the key partners to address these concerns with that. Both the board and the administration share the commitment to do what is best for students and to make sure their needs are being met with that. Also, the administration seeks to fulfill the board's request that the partnership with the Evanston Police Department be revised regarding the roles of the SROs. So consequently, board, tonight we'd like to really focus in on two areas. The first area would be to increase the school and the district capacity on working on the procedure for the de-escalation if a student is going through some type of a crisis for that as well. And then the second one will be to look at modifying the role of the SRO to meet the needs that the board stated in last spring, and also to better fit in with the levels of de-escalation that we have with that as well. You'll see on there, if you look under, what we should also point out to that is that, Andali, would you talk to the second paragraph about having stakeholders be involved in this interim period, so we would have a lot of feedback from them once we have put these interim practices in place.
So, a couple things in response to this draft and this working procedure that we're doing tonight. Our plan, Romy and I, would be to meet in the spring with first of all, the evening people will watch the key stakeholders to give input. Our plan is to bring them together to review the speakers and the items of the report from this procedure that I have before. Secondly, we want to review in that we did not engage students through, but to develop plans to potentially engage students around feedback around our procedures on both how to respond to students in crisis and the support currently on that, and also our SROs.
Does the board have any questions regarding that part of it? This point. So what we'd like to do is look at establishing those protocols, and those protocols, which are on the bottom of page 17 on your document there, are in three levels. The first level is the school-based staff that would be collaborating with the students and with the parents to generate support which would be effective on utilizing the work that's been done using the behavior continuum. Level 2 would be that district school-based crisis intervention work would be done with students and parents to help generate that support. In a moment, I'll be asking Romy to explain to you how that would be put in place, because obviously a big part of that is going to be training that needs to take place to have the capacity in order to do that at the district level. Level 3, which would be the very last resort, would be to call in at that point an ambulance, dial 911 if it were a student that was harming or could be harming himself or herself or other students as well with that. So Romy, if we could, would you mind going through the process that we used? And I know since we put this document together, there's even been some further refinements on that. If you could walk the board through that.
Make sure you're talking into it.
Yeah. There you go. Could you also, Romy, could you talk about the recertification too, so it's not just a one-time?
Yeah, so everybody who was certified last year, they go through refresher courses, so we'll continue to keep people updated in their certification, but this year it's just going to be open to more staff. So we put on an ongoing basis, have more staff who are being certified every year.
I just wanted to compare a little bit more about what escalation
was wondering if you could help us understand, so the levels, it's very helpful to see the levels of support in the protocols, but kind of framing under what scenarios something would move from one level to another, or an example. I know there can't be any like clear, if this happens, then it's level 2. I understand that there's judgment involved, but just to help add some color to, how does one know as a school-based staff person that it's under what conditions that we should have an interventionist come in, and then under what is this all under the auspices of non-life threatening? And yet, at some point, someone or some people have to decide whether this is a life-threatening situation to the child or to someone else. So just for those of us who aren't experienced in that, and we have to communicate this out to help others understand, how might you describe it?
I think we need two things. So one, there are students who we know might experience escalation more frequently, and they might be students who already have a specific plan in place. And for them, I would say that there is a regular support team who is supporting them. Now, if there's a student who's never seen a level of escalation before, that might be cause for more alarm. So I don't want to say this happens to this, because there are some students where we might expect there are plans in place to support those students, whereas there might be one student who's never experienced a level of escalation, and that kind of raises the severity of the situation a little bit more. But I would say in general, I think if you're trained in de-escalation and you have done everything that you're supposed to do, and the student is not calming down or even escalating more, and it's getting to the point where you are worried about their safety, in some cases we have to remove other people, so I'm just thinking if it gets to the point where nothing that they're doing is working, you've given them the space, time's going further, then you call us for help. It's hard to get over that.
No.
Because if people know the students best, and they know this is behavior that they've seen before, or it's brand new, or there's something going on, and that's why we use the whole team, the professional judgment to make those decisions. That's not a great answer, but it does vary by situation, but just as it's getting more escalated and nothing else is working, then we call more support. I think what's helpful about this is we hopefully have more support sooner, and we have backup options and different sets of eyes that can come in and support a student and the staff who are involved before we need to necessarily jump to, we need to call an ambulance, or we need to call 911 right now. I don't know if that helps.
No, that does help. And I think related to that, I was just wondering this is clearly, it will have a huge and positive impact to have more people trained, and that's part of the issues that we have. What do you see, or what does your team see as how do we know if that's a sufficient number? Relative to our kids in our community, and how do we gauge whether we need to make additional commitments? So how's that going to work as you continue to grow capacity to understand, are we where we need? I know obviously it would be incidences, but beyond that, how do you know, and then by extension, we know whether we need to put additional resources or support or training, et cetera?
So in our behavior continuum, we identify a way to really document when there are infractions that are on level 4 or 5, which are disciplinary infractions that may involve self-injurious behavior. Level 3, fighting. Level 4 is repeated or there's major harm. And level 5. So our behavior continuum that the board using policy adopted want to be able to turn around and you think about how are we developing interventions to support that child versus how are we doing pure input or is it supportive plan? So how is supporting that interventions alternative sort of practices they talk about support? So how do we as a community or the administration support that child? So what we will do as part of our review will be to consider the levels, the times in which we have to ask for additional support, whether it's from the internal team to be able to assist the child, and then when we have to ask for external support. And then what I will say is that our annual or our regular review, the data will be to be able to measure the growth or improvement and hope and not hope, but I really think our plan will de-escalate.
And then in each of our buildings, we'll have crisis response teams, the teams that are usually the group that does respond when student needs more support. And after any crisis situation, part of the de-escalation protocols that they go through a reflection as a team where they talk about what worked, what we've been effective, what we can do better next time. And I think an important part of getting information and having that support for everybody is reaching out to those teams that, after incidences or at the end of the year, like, we focus here and through, because I think through those conversations, we'll know if there was enough support on hand and if there was a situation. So, taking feedback, that would be an important step too.
Something new this year also is our students in crisis plan. So schools were asked to develop and to use there's a template in our behavior continuum that asks schools to be able to review how they respond to a crisis when a student is having a hard time and is not responding to staff direction. So the student crisis plan is meant to really be able to develop internal capacity to be able to respond to a challenge. So we're not making this up as we go along. There's a sense of who can help each other, those adults in the building who can reach out to support a child who needs it.
And does the reflection of that plan also go into looking at what might have been an antecedent or a precursor of what conditions? I mean, because it's just not the child, right? There were conditions under which there was escalation, so understanding what that source or.
May I ask a question that will likely illuminate my rookiness? Do you have access to the behavior continuum?
Yeah, so if you look, you have access to it.
I don't know if I did it.
Board policy 710.
Okay, so it just is it on the website or, okay.
It's not currently linked, I just tried, it's not, we need to.
Yeah, I saw it referenced multiple times and I was like, I'd love to see
It was
what that.
also in the family handbook, correct?
It is also referenced in the student handbook, so
But we'll work on the link in the policy.
Yeah, if it's possible to just send that to the board.
Directly.
and I can send you.
That'd be great. Thanks. I was like, I see it referenced, I'd love to look at it.
Oh, is it an attachment?
May I ask an unrelated question? So, I'm imagining that in the evolution of where we're landing on what we want for our restorative practices, we may not always be on the same page with our police department's practices and protocols. And so have we given, and this may be too granular, but I know that when we're having an ambulance response, my understanding is it's procedure to have a police response with that. Has there been any ability to negotiate how forceful that police response is? Because I know we have times where 4 police cars show up with an ambulance, and that seems like something if we have to have it. I understand that police generally go where EMTs are to make sure that the EMTs are safe. But if we're talking about a student in crisis, that seems like a lot of police presence that doesn't meet the need of the threat. And so I don't know if that's been part of the conversations of making some adaptations to what their standard protocols are when they're on school properties to de-escalate their presence and what that can do for a school community. Has that been?
By the way, the behavior continuum it's just an exhibit, it's not the link. So if you go onto the district website and look under the board page, goals and policies,
okay.
And 7190 is the student behavior policy,
okay.
And then there is an exhibit there. Yeah, it's there.
Great. You can still email it to me if you want to.
Don't make her do the work.
As we hear your comment, and one of the things that we are aware is that by the time we're at a place of calling 911, it's going to be just like any other 911 call that would be made in the city, and part of the police response is to come out and determine what that level of threat is, either to the individuals who are currently in the situation, or for the responders who are coming out to offer and provide services. So typically what I have seen is that that number dissipates very quickly when it's a small issue related to a child, but they will ask information during the 911 call, which might be able to guide their response.
Yeah, I'm wondering if we could have more consistent and clear ways to communicate to them when a principal feels like this is a mostly contained situation, but we need to address the needs of this particular student.
As a health matter.
Like it's a health matter. It's not other students are not at risk. Whatever that looks like, I don't know. But I feel like
part of that is, it does say here 911 or SRO. If we haven't really talked about the SRO component, but that before I think would have been a natural point where if you're engaging an SRO versus straight 911, then there's a more specific conversation. So here it says either or. Is there clarity around under what conditions you would, is it both?
I think if you need an ambulance, you have to call 911.
right.
Okay.
But is it possible to work with the city to rethink what the police presence is with those 911 calls on school property?
My experience is when an ambulance and the police arrive when a 911 call has happened, they're usually looking to the school staff and who's in charge, and that absolutely, that's going to be harmful to the student and say that you kind of under control, you have to sit back, but that could be a conversation depending on the situation when they arrive.
I guess part of my concern here is addressing the immediate needs, but also just the impact for folks to have significant police presence in our schools. I've anecdotally been involved in situations with police that happened to be there for something else that then got into an altercation with a parent, and it escalated and weapons were drawn and all sorts of things. And I think we want to be really mindful of that police are there for the reasons that they're there, and that we don't necessarily need to. I think there can be a significant impact on particularly communities of color, but for a lot of people to feel like the police are at their school with any kind of consistency. I know our school had significant police presence 2 years ago, and I think the impact for parents in their own safety and picking up their children and everything else is impacted by that. So being more intentional about that when police are present, it's for a very specific need, and that we collaborate with the police to determine what's the level of response based on the situation, which seems like something that could be negotiated through that 911 process.
And what we have found is that the chief and the deputy chiefs have been so responsive, and the dialogue is open. So I do believe that your points are areas that we can have further communication with them. So thank you for raising those concerns.
We will, but we're continuing discussion, so after the discussion, then we'll invite you over.
So board, do you have any other questions about the protocol, or also the professional development, which is really the key to this on building the capacity? I would like to publicly thank Romy and Andaleeb on the great job they've done on putting this together. And we had the concept there, but they ran with it with the conceptualization of it and how quickly can we do the training on it, and they've exceeded expectations on getting that done. So they've done a marvelous job on it.
Thank you. I just have one other question. Sure. It's really a point which you guys already talked about, but in terms of training, I think historically a lot of escalation sometimes happens on playgrounds and during time outside or lunch, and I didn't see any of the staff that may be in those environments included here in addition to paraprofessionals. So I was just wondering if you've considered that in terms of some folks being trained in de-escalation that are staffing those periods. Yeah.
So I think you're talking about like lunch
Lunch
supervisors
or
and
recess
recess
supervisors.
coordinators.
Yeah. Thank you.
Great question.
Yeah, good points.
So I would move us towards looking at our behavior continuum, which really specifically speaks to that. Typically, we're talking about self-harm or harm to others. We're not talking about an expression of anger or frustration or we're talking about where there's potential, where an act where the student is actually either causing themselves harm or causing another harm. Really, our focus of our work has been to really engage the improvement. So I'm just trying to pull it down. If you look at the work that Beck and our district administration worked very closely on this past spring was to really isolate the fact that children are going to have a hard time, recognize that children have a right to have a hard time. Oh, thank you. That truly has a so really, so for example, in here it talks about really vandalism, typically like harming the environment, where they're destroying the classroom, for example, where the adults have tried, they're working very hard to de-escalate the space. That means that. So when we talk to spring, this is not a time where we need to immediately call the police. This is a time where we need to really rely on the building and also mental health professionals for the support. And that's what we heard from the feedback. And so what we have done is we said, okay, so what does that look like in our district? We have some very targeted training that we felt when we looked across the system. There's an opportunity to increase that level of support. And so crisis is not about, and so when I use a word, I'm really speaking to the fact that we're talking about physical violence and where somebody's getting hurt, whether it's a child themselves or another person, another child or an adult. And that is obviously the threshold that we're trying to interrupt, where we do see that there are situations throughout the country where often that becomes the default is to call the police. We don't want that to be the default. We want the default to be that we have adults who are hurting the building. Now, there are situations that require where that situation gets into a life-threatening situation where we do have to call the partners to come in. And we want those partners to really be on the same page with us about how we can prevent that situation. And that's where we do set up. But for us, it's really about severe physical violence. Where that's the level where it's a high level.
Is it your sense in the trainings that have been happening that our educators have an understanding of kind of their own bias in terms of threat and being able to identify what is, I'm fearful of the student and therefore I feel like I'm moving quickly through this continuum when that's not necessarily an accurate reflection of what is happening or, that's my concern. A lot of the larger conversations about the difference between being threatened and feeling threatened and how do we take into account or do people have a good understanding of I know in previous conversations about disparity in discipline, bias has a huge influence over who is perceived as a threat and what level of threat they are perceived as. And so what's the overlay on helping people understand kind of what actions define a threat rather than having enough flexibility that bias fills in those gaps? Did the question make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense.
Okay.
I think we can do all the training in the world, there are some people who are still going to have a different level, that they're comfortable dealing with. But what people were trying to do is make sure that if there is a teacher or educator, somebody who's in a situation where they don't feel
also talk about the equity tool as far as measuring?
So one of the things that is remaining in our initial draft that we want to take a step forward is to really make sure that we engage the racial impact assessment tool to work together with 2 or 3 identified other stakeholders within the next month to make sure that we go through that. We did draw on the information from April and May where there was a lot of feedback from various stakeholders to really help inform this process. So we have not done an exclusion. It was a review of that. It was we've heard from really strong voices about the need for some significant changes here. That's really what Carrie felt of it. So I would say that when I think about the particularly for our families of color, that was a driving voice that was in those meetings, and I would say that was not the sole voice, but I do want to make sure that we will go through that racial impact assessment tool as we take our procedures to the final pass. We've also, there were voices of teachers that have come out, so there are some other voices, teachers, administrators. Part of what we did here was how do we focus on the core issue, which is separating mental health crises from a situation that's an emergency, and really how we build the capacity for school buildings to support student health needs, really, in a way that doesn't police them in any way. And so how can we separate that? Doesn't mean that there aren't still conversations about it that need to be addressed, but for right now, this is a very urgent call.
I just have one comment to make. I appreciate you including our students, and I would really love to see, once you collected all of the feedback from the students, how our students grade us. We talked during, last year, we talked about respect and what respect means from adult and what that means from a student. And I think for me, the most important voice is how are we doing in the eyes of our students. So I really appreciate that voice being included, and I would just love to see that elevated in this work, and I would love to see that come back to the board for review, because I would really love to hear from them.
Are we supposed to be asking questions on the transforming the SRO part as well?
That's coming now.
Okay.
Missed a good segue.
Yeah, I think that's a good segue. Thank you for asking. So if there's no more questions on that piece of it, well, let's go into SRO, right? And so the building capacity to SRO. So if you want to talk a little bit about the changing role of the SRO, Phil?
Sure, we will. I'll start it off, and I'm going to turn it over to Andaleep. Andaleep gave me the back history of this, and also to Heidi as well, on where we go from here with this. We have met with the Evanston Police Department and Chief Cook on 2 occasions, and Andaleep, I don't recall how many times you've met subsequent to that with the police department. Would it be safe to say 5 or 6, somewhere in there with that? To really mold this out, so this has been a long process on doing that. Would you, Andaleep, walk through with the board the changes in the model would be, and then also looking at the T-chart that we have in there of looking at the changes, what they would be from?
So in this document really is to prioritize what I would say is really increasing the focus of our collaboration with our police department to really focus on emergency planning and to be able to get their support in terms of really isolating those situations and then being prepared to assist us in the event of a crisis. We know that school safety is a national problem.
Heidi, is there anything that you wanted to add to that?
I just want to maybe add a point of emphasis, and that is that the role previously was much more intertwined at some schools for investigation purposes, and you can see from what Andalib has outlined that it's really shifting that role into more safety roles and responsibilities.
And just to reiterate again, this is, we will review this policy again the next time we have a policy committee, just to see how it's unfolding, correct? Because it is just an interim policy as we continue to discuss the SRO, and then we're going to continue to engage stakeholders as to what their experience is with this particular policy that is an interim policy. Procedures, I'm sorry, yes, procedures. Any other questions, comments, concerns?
I will say one thing, which is that when we look at our racial equity statement and so what guidebooks work also is that we have standing policy that we believe that we can rely on to help guide us forward. So I would say that the behavior continuum, the racial equity impact assessment tool, as well as our belief in confronting institutionalized racism, but we're also guided with procedure that's core. Moving to procedures here, we felt that some of those possibilities exist in terms of what the district vision is around this partnership, and so we felt that this was the path to developing procedures. So yes, we will bring that back for review.
Yes.
Go ahead. Go ahead. We'll probably, I'll begin with, really, that was a reference to lawful behavior. So there are times, I think that they are not the norm, but there are times when there is an incident related to unlawful behavior where we are going to be contacting the police, and that could come from a variety of sources. I can think of several instances where something like that would be the correct response by the school. So unlawful behavior of a significant kind, that we would reach out to the law enforcement for that.
Andalib, could you clarify too, I believe in the last thing we had, they talked about that they, being the police department, is changing their model as far as having the detectives do the investigation rather than, could you elaborate that a little bit? I think that.
So, well, I think number one, I mean, just background that I look into, so there are, this is why this is really an adaptive process for our school system versus the technology, right? So from an adaptive perspective, what I would say is that the legal threshold for when we call police are four definitions based on our legal counsel. So the first one is when a student is determined to clear and present himself, first off, others, the principal of both elementary school, or is or is immediate report to the Department of State Police within 24 hours of the
discussed with the training that the SROs currently have and the training that they would be receiving as well?
Right, so our SROs are all included with the university, and I know that this will be extended to other training, potentially other members of the We've also our SROs have also been through many hours of juvenile support in elementary or juvenile spaces. So with additional training, crisis intervention training, they've also been through those training. And we've also, because of our work on our sort of practices, we will be working with the police department to increase their ability to understand our sort of practices. Now, the department has used these sort of practices for many years. Work with the Mohan Center very closely. In fact, that was the person who was schooling us. The police department actually led the initial sort of practice training. And so they were very connected with that.
I have two questions. The first is to the point of the SROs referring criminal matters to EPD detectives. Are we at all, if they were doing more of the investigation in the past and they have specialized training that other detectives may or may not, are we gonna lose any of that understanding of youth, additional training that we have around beyond diversity by having there be a transition to other detectives that may not have that frame? And did you talk about that potential risk?
So we talked about all the cases would be referred to the juvenile departments. So it would not be to community departments. So cases would be referred to juvenile departments. We did not talk about other members of the juvenile department going through the university, but it's something we can have
So that was my first one. The second one is just, it may be intentional or not intentional, but under the current, in the T, you call it a T something? I call it a chart, but whatever, a T chart. The fourth bullet down on current role, where it's talking about investigations, includes sexual abuse. And in the reference to investigations in the revised role, it only speaks to coordinate and engage in investigations regarding violent and or criminal activity. So was there an intention there that sexual abuse is going to be treated differently, or?
I can make a comment about that. And, forensic investigations take over for youth related to sexual assault and abuse. So they do have a division specifically aligned and trained and specializing in that area. So even if it was the SRO, it would have ended up being bumped up to their forensic investigations.
So it's not that investigation won't happen, it's that it would be initially.
It will still happen, but it will happen by the correct individuals.
Right, thank you.
Good questions. And I would just want to confirm too, and just, looking, this is part of our board policy as well, that regardless of who's conducting the interview, if it's now the juvenile detective, that there's still, those interviews won't happen without a parent or legal guardian present.
That's consistent with current law too.
And, right, I'm assuming that our policy is pursuant to state code. I just want to generally say thank you for the work on this. I think, I think in terms of being clear on language, we might want to consider moving away from the term SRO, because I think that using that still for community members who aren't necessarily, it still creates a perception that we're using SROs, and I think what this plan proposes is that we are not using student resource officers, right? We're moving away from the situation where police officers are being used in student de-escalation. That doesn't mean that we don't have adult relationships with the police to deal with the various drills that we have to do and the various emergency training and all of that sort of thing. So I would encourage us to think about if we can use a term other than SRO, so it doesn't feel like, well, we've just tweaked the policy, but we're still using SROs. Because I think it is an important shift away to say that we are not going to have police officers regularly in our school buildings anymore. We aren't going to have, like incidents that we had in the past where a police officer is called on a student who is just dysregulated. I think that's an important shift, and I'm afraid that shift will get lost if we continue to use the term SRO. So that would be, I guess, my one comment. But otherwise, thank you for the work. I think this is a significant shift and in response to what we heard from our community, and I think that's important. So thank you for that.
We'll have to really consider it and take back your most recent comment, just to continue to see how we can work with the city and the police department to achieve these goals. Now, right now, many meetings have happened, and I feel like we are in a good mutual place of understanding, and yet that term is what allows us the funding stream to have dedicated support. So I can't be certain exactly how that will work out, but we have a lot of time to collect information, see how this is going, and we will definitely share back with the board as we have more information about that.
All right, great, thank you.
I think all public schools would be reluctant to ever give up any resources that come to them from outside.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
we'll work through that.
I'd like to call up Meg Crewley to comment on the SRO update.
Hi, Meg.
So thank you, Anjali, for the work that you did. I just have a couple comments to the board, and they're in specifically regarding transforming the roles of the SRO. I think that the work that I see that the administration did was really reflective of the community input, and I wonder, thanks Rebecca for talking about that students need to be, but there's other stakeholders that are involved, so what I see really is reflective of a group of stakeholders, and I just want to make sure that the board considers other groups of stakeholders as well. I think one thing that I know that we've talked a lot about as a district is building relationships, and that relationships are really important. And so I guess I am a little disappointed to see the shift away from the relationship building with officers, school resource officers. And so,
Meg, are you referring to relationships with staff or students?
Both.
You are.
Yep. I think if we are only calling them in emergent situations and issues of only safety, I think we are losing the capacity to build a connection and a relationship at a different level. And I think just as we are really challenging each other to look at the way we use discipline in the other way of using it as a support and more of a proactive and restorative versus always coming at it from a punitive and discipline, I guess I would encourage you all to think the same way, and that there are other uses for SRO officers. We said this in the spring in April. Dex said this then. I'm going to say it again. I'm just going to read two comments that we did get from our members, which was that SROs do have positive relationships with students, not just negative ones, that we would like to see them not just seen as punitive, but also in the positive role that they provide. Students see professionals in their communities like SROs as human, approachable, and safe rather than adversaries. So I think it's just another way, and so I would just encourage you to consider both sides of it and not just one. And so if we don't want a single story being seen, I don't think that we should, or heard, I don't think that we should contribute to a single story that we're also providing for the use of that. I do think that the district has done great work, especially with the restorative practice coaches and the work on the behavior continuum, to really encourage educators to think about how we're doing things proactively. And so I think that there is an avenue for that to happen. I'd like to see that done throughout, and so that we're not just limiting that use in our SROs as well. Thanks.
Just really quick, when you said stakeholders, did you have specific people in mind?
I don't hear the educator voice at all in your revision of SROs.
Okay, thank you.
And I think you brought up students.
Anybody else like to comment on this conversation?
So I'm a school social worker. I had one comment and one question. So I kind of wanted to bounce off of this. I appreciate what you said about when police are responding. So as a school social worker, I want us to keep in mind that we have a lot of kids who have trauma histories. Trauma history specifically with the police, trauma history specifically with guns. When there is a huge amount of police officers in the school, even students that the police aren't necessarily called for that student, that re-triggers a lot of students and it can cause them. I just think
Can you just pull that closer?
I just want us to think about triggering kids who have trauma histories. And so then going off of that with our SROs, if they're shifting a little bit, you mentioned they'd be walking the perimeter more, looking at things more from a safety perspective. So my question is, is there anything that can be done about not always having a gun visible? Because we do have students, I know at my school we have students who have trauma histories related to gun violence and related to being the victim of guns by someone in authority.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I think that's definitely something we should consider.
We had talked about the possibility of them being in a different uniform or something specific to schools. If that's something that could be part of your next conversation with Chief Cook, I can't imagine why they couldn't give him some cool gear.
Yeah, if they're walking the perimeter, they don't
Yeah.
they don't necessarily need to be in full uniform.
That's a really good point in regards to, the trauma that children have experienced around, again, folks with authority, right? And something to really consider. Again, that you don't necessarily have to carry a gun to be able to make a place safe. It could be a club, it could be something else, but that doesn't have to be a gun, right? I think about Europe, right? And the cops over in London don't carry guns, they carry batons. I mean, it's and crime's low, right? So whatever conversation we can have with the police department to really kind of rethink how their officers approach our schools and how they come equipped, that would be really, really fruitful.
I just wanted to address too the comment about considering still providing an opportunity for a positive student relationship with police officers. Because I think that's really why what prompted, or a lot of the discussion we had last spring was around whether or not that's really the appropriate role of the schools in the district to facilitate a positive relationship with an entity that historically and our current present data shows us does not exist in the world at large. And are we actually creating a dangerous situation for a student by saying, here is a person you can trust, and people who look like this are people that you can trust if you're in trouble, when outside of the school walls that may not be true. So I hear the concerns about can't we try to create a positive relationship with police officers, but I also think that what we heard from parents, particularly parents of color, is that just isn't the reality that they pass on to their children. And so I'm not sure that I am comfortable as a school district saying, well, we're going to do it anyway. So I think we're intentionally moving away from, if the police department wants to engage in community relationship building, they are perfectly entitled to do that, and I encourage them to find ways to do that. I don't believe that it should be happening with the facilitation of the school district. I don't think and so I think that's part of what we are trying to address with revising our procedures.
And I definitely think it's happening. The police department recently approved 2 new positions for Latino liaisons. So I definitely think that they've been listening and
Good.
they're open to suggestions, so.
I think that's fantastic.
Yeah.
That's a great example.
Yeah.
Any other comments, concerns, questions about the SRO shifting roles? Sure. Come on up.
Hello, everybody. I'm Brittany again. Nice to see you all.
You're still Brittany.
I'm still Brittany. Nothing has changed. It's amazing. My question for you, and I know I'm super excited about Romy and Andali pushing for more CPI instructors and being able to spread that knowledge to many teachers and educators. I think that's super helpful, especially with the focus on the verbal de-escalation, because I'm behind you on we don't need everybody to know how to do physical restraints because we don't want to encourage that. But I know that when I was reading about the SRO change in the spring, as a mental health professional, I'm curious about if there's going to be any more balance with the mental health side of it. I know, and I don't know if that's like happening through the CPI training or if there was other thoughts about how to support these students. If we're moving away from certain services, how do we kind of compensate since our plates are going to remain the same but may need to increase? So does that make sense as a wonder?
Right. So that's kind of I have to have that in the back of my mind. So given that we're giving these trainings to our educators and across the buildings, what's the current capacity, right, that folks have? What's the current workload? And is this something else? Is this something that they can fit on their plate, right? I mean, given that we're asking a lot of our educators, right, in the past couple of years about racial equity work. Again, this is a really great, policy proposal, and we're kind of moving away from that SRO role as we try to build the capacity of our educators.
Mm-hmm.
But what's the capacity now, right? Mm-hmm. Like, are you overloaded with caseloads right now? Would you be able to take this on? So that's my question to Deck. Maybe if you can survey, your staff, your support staff, in regards to being able to take something on like this. I'd really like to know, because I really think we again, this all sounds great, but at the implementation is where in the details it's just tough. I appreciate the question. It's something that I did have on the back of my mind in regards to making sure that what's the capacity that our workforce currently has to be able to take something like this on, and not that you don't want to. And I think, and a lot of it, I think, is again some of the tweaks. We've invested in the training beyond diversity, courageous conversations, SEED. So there's that lens, but that mental health lens as well is really important. I know this board really values social emotional supports for our kiddos, right? Mm-hmm. So, and I guess something that is still ongoing that we're still trying to develop.
I think that'll be a critical component of when we revisit this in April, is to figure out, I think, and we've heard the need for additional training for staff, and so I think this addresses that part and maybe can deal with the sort of level 1, level 2, or maybe even just level 1. I don't know. I think we'll have to see. Is this actually, though, assisting with some of the cases where we are seeing more dysregulation or whatever the case may be, and so is the additional training sufficient, or do we actually need to consider additional staff or additional supports? So I think that's going to be a critical piece of the feedback that we need when we revisit this in April.
And I would like to, congratulate the board, because I do think that you have a dual investment going on. You have added restorative practice coaches. We've met. We are excited about the work that they're doing, student level, staff level. We feel like that is going to really help with the social and emotional learning growth that we want to see, as well as some of those trauma-informed practices. The board has also invested in 3 additional assistant principals specifically to help further our work with student services. And all of this wraparound service and love with the training is not going to be enough, because what we're just starting to learn about the mental health needs of schools, within schools, it's a very big project. So I consider this a multi-year goal. I believe we'll go through iterations with staff and with needs, and as we identify what those needs are, and I know Meg will help us with that in terms of surveying staff and really having our eyes on this, we will have a much better idea of where we need to go, and we will be sharing that information with the board. But we're on a good path, but it's not going to be perfect. We're going to have some bumps. We're going to see what those are, but there were some lessons in the past that brought us to where we are today. And so we're really trying to be very reflective about those as we build this new model. And I'm grateful for everyone who has participated in bringing this about. And I know we're going to get good feedback, so we will be sharing.
But I also think it's important that we as an institution stand tall on our values. So if we hear from a contingent of people that they feel unsafe or they feel harmed by a practice, and another contingent of folks who violate that practice, I think that it's our responsibility as an institution to say, well, what are our values here? And how do we stand tall on our values to make sure that folks are not harmed? And I think that is relevant to this conversation. It's also relevant to the earlier conversation that we were having about, having an opt-out option is harmful, right? And you have to stand on what all values are. And I think that over-policing children and families is harmful and hurtful and traumatizing. And folks told us that. And if the response by another contingent of people that violate that, I think that we have to also assess, well, what are our values and what are our responsibilities and where are we going to stand for. And I appreciate the focus today.
I'm sorry, I feel like I need to clarify for a minute. I was not saying that we were saying we like that. So I was not saying. Okay. Yeah, that was not at all.
You were happy with the tool that folks identified as having made them feel unsafe and traumatized.
I think I was just asking about whether there was a way to think about other alternative uses besides just using them in one way. So absolutely not saying that we didn't need to revisit it and re-clarify. And I do think the T-chart was pretty clear, and the way and being really clear on procedure or protocol, not trying to diminish. So I want to be really clear about that. I was not saying that we don't need to recognize even what Ms. Zafka brought up. I'm just saying that are there other avenues in that relationships is, I thought, a value that we did hold as a district. I hear your point. I'm just asking, instead of swinging to all one direction, is there any advantage to any pieces? That's all. So I just want to be really clear. I was absolutely not saying that we didn't need to keep because we feel that the harm that has been invoked on families, on children is okay. I need to clarify that.
Thanks.
Thank you.
If I can just add, Meg, I think I share your passion for relationships in our schools. I think the question here is whether there's who gets to have those relationships, and I think Suni, your point is important for, do we need to be facilitating police having relationships with our kids if there is harm, not just to the specific kids, but to anyone else that experiences that as an unsafe environment. So I think my understanding of this is not getting rid of relationship work, but shifting the relationship work to other entities and other spaces to make sure that we're building the capacity for students to feel supported, but not necessarily through the relationship of police.
Okay. Any other questions, comments, concerns about the shifting role of the SRO? All right. If there's no more comments, questions, concerns, I'm going to. I'm sorry.
Just one quick one on, I know that they're all just the perfunctory press, and I think that's fine. I don't have any question about that. I just wanted to, as we were thinking about the gender policy for staff and refining the implementation of the student procedures, if we look at 640 curriculum development, which again didn't have anything significant change to it, but when I was reading it, I noticed there's a section that says single gender classes and activities. And so I wonder if this could be an opportunity when we get the outside consultant, when we're having Nikki Baser do this work, if we can at a later date look at that piece and see how we can better phrase things to include our students who are non-binary.
That's a good point.
That was it. Now I'm done.
Okay. Good catch. All right. So should we hold off that particular policy for further discussion, and then amend this, and then?
I don't think it needs to stop us from
Okay.
moving forward. I think that it's
But
just a
so we
note to
Right.
the
Okay.
team to look at that one as we're refining
Great.
policy and procedures.
Okay, so if there are no questions or concerns regarding the Press Plus and 5-year policy reviews, I recommend the policies be presented to the full board for approval.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, with that, I'd like to close our policy committee meeting at 8:37 p.m. And I want to thank all of you for your wonderful work on these policies and procedures, and looking forward to our next meeting in April, I want to say 12th, but April 20th, yes, so see you then.